Hey, my name is DJ Chuang. I'm the author of MultiAsian.Church, and I am having a conversation here with Dr. Roy Kim, who is a therapist here in the Fullerton, California area, Southern California, and he has a therapy practice called New Legacy Counseling.
New Legacy Counseling.
Yes.
Yeah, and not a doctor, by the way, not a doctor. No
Okay.
doctoral degree. Yeah.
Well, you're very experienced because you've also been a pastor in the past, and we're recording this unedited so that you can sense that. Well, we don't have a lot of time to edit because we're just amateurs, but we
all
have
are.
we have a very important message that's on my heart and also on Roy's. I was listening to a recent episode of a podcast called Centering that comes out of the Asian American Center at Fuller Seminary. And a couple of things really caught my attention. And I'll refer you to that episode in the show notes here. But Roy shared about how, as a therapist, he's recognized, and the statistics tell us that the addiction to pornography is a serious issue for men, and Asian American pastors are not an exception to that. But because of our shame culture and because of the position of pastors, it would be like career suicide to try to address that on a personal, much less communal basis. So, Roy, I want to hear from you and help pastors to understand that if they're caught between a rock and a hard place and they're struggling with this, or if they counsel men and even women in their congregation that are struggling with this, how can they take some safe and helpful steps for themselves and for others?
Well, helpful steps. I can lay out a few. Safe. That's a different issue.
Correct.
I think each pastor is going to have a different threshold of what they feel is safe to them.
Mm.
And I spoke to Jessica Chen Feng on Centering regarding this issue about um, pastors feeling like if they were to ever share with their elder board or to their congregation about their porn addiction or their sexual addiction, that it would be career suicide. And in many ways, I agree that it might be, especially given some of the stances that churches have regarding porn addiction. Which, if you peel back the layers of the onion a bit, it's quite hypocritical. I think you would think that if the stats are right, that roughly 65-ish, 70% of males in a church struggle with porn addiction or sex addiction, and 57% of the pastors do, and maybe 25-ish percent of females do, then what the congregation is saying is, hey, pastor, we can struggle with porn addiction, but you can't. Right? So, and the elders are saying, shame, shame, shame. Like, we can, but you can't. Right? So, so we're really dealing with an interesting, hypocritical issue here, where the pastors, if they are in a culture where they cannot divulge that because they get fired, then I think most of them will just keep their mouths shut. But what happens is a great impotency, and I guess I say that kind of tongue in cheek here. There is a great impotency in their ability to minister at the level of, I don't know. I think pastors can be good professional Christians, but I think if we're really talking about the audience of one, like the Lord Jesus Christ being your boss, the one who is guiding all of your steps. How well will he think of these decisions to just keep these things in private and to live that inauthentically and to continue to do sermon prep and take breaks watching porn and go up to the pulpit and speak these things and have people think that you are the greatest person alive? I mean, there's kind of a sham going on, I think, all over the place. And it's not me necessarily being like judgmental, because, I'm part of that. I'm part of that equation. One of the things I share in my podcast is how my porn and sex addiction as a pastor was, it was one of the things that caused me the most shame. And I couldn't believe myself when I was, back when I was pastoring. This was like, late 90s and early 2000s. Back then, the commentaries of choice were like the NIGTC and the word commentary with that green and black, covering. And, I've been reading those things late at night and prepping for my sermons, and take a break, maybe play some StarCraft. And then after playing StarCraft, then I'd watch porn. Then then my eyes were glazed over, and then turn that off and go back to sermon prep. And it's like, something's wrong here, right? Like I'm just not just morally, but it's just like I'm just compartmentalizing things so strongly that I can not only fool the congregation into thinking that I'm like this great person, full of great moral choices, but I'm also I'm not giving the congregation an example of what it means to be gospel driven. And that doesn't mean, me never making bad mistakes. It means gospel driven means, how can I allow the blood of Christ to really be the thing that allows me to confess my sin to people, to myself and to people, and to let the gospel wash over and to say, I need help. And as I get help, will you help me get help? And I just feel like that's what's lacking in the churches. And that's why I love doing what I do, as a sex addiction therapist. I love inviting pastors to come get treatment, to come into a group that's tailor-made for pastors with porn and sex addiction, to come and say, this might be your one place currently where you can be that authentic and let the gospel wash over you. And not only are we just kind of sitting around saying, oh, I relapsed, or, oh, I looked at porn, but we're saying, no, we're going to abide by these protocols because the research has shown that this is actually effective for long-term sobriety. And I just feel like this is the remedy. This is the way to fight against the culture on very, small battlefronts. But I think the larger culture is going to take a lot of revolutionizing, because there are many, if not, I think the majority of churches will just go ahead and can you for saying I have a porn addiction. They're thinking about like what the congregation is going to say, and they say, well, the congregation might pressure them, say, well, we don't want someone like this in the pastorate.
Well, what you describe is such a lifeline. And before we go there, I think one thing I want to say is that your first step is not to divulge it to your church leadership or your church. Your first step is to get help for yourself.
I believe so.
Yeah, and I think you've described that because you're a sex addiction therapist, you've been a pastor, you work with pastors. Um, I would hope that people understand that in talking with a therapist, everything's confidential, and
Yes,
you have the sensitivity of that kind of work, and you're a Korean American, so that you can speak very sensitively and reassure people that, hey, it's okay, just have a phone call. You might even start with, hey, I have a pastor friend who's struggling with
right.
pornography. What would you
Asking for a friend.
advise? Sure, sure. But just to start that conversation will be a huge first step towards a pastor getting himself help. And that compartmentalizing you talked about, um, we are holistic beings, and I think, especially for us as people of color, we as a culture we compartmentalize less, and psychologically we're one person. And so when we're compartmentalizing, it's going to come out sideways. It's
Hmm.
going to come out in relational harm. It's going to come out in the weight of shame will actually can actually eat away at your body, because your body knows.
Definitely.
And shame is literally the silent killer. So it also means your ministry may seem fruitful, but it could be so much more fruitful, and it's so much more life and freedom for yourself that you don't have to live with that shame, even though you're currently there.
Right.
That there's a way out that is hopeful. And
Right.
then as you get help and get healthy yourself, then then you can worry about the career thing later and how to navigate that. How does that sound? Can you
I
elaborate?
think I think that sounds great. Um, and I do empathize with people who are fearful of losing their pastoral jobs. They have families to support. Um, but I'm just, I'm going to go back to. So this is one of the things that I realized about my life
Hmm.
um, ever since going into recovery.
Hmm.
Recovery is probably the thing that has, other than maybe a few like revival meetings back in the day, but I think recovery has been one of the things that has opened my eyes to what it means to be released from shame by Jesus Christ.
Mm.
And I believe that hanging on to a pastoral job is not the way to salvation. It's not the way to life giving life. I believe being liberated by Christ is the way to life giving life. And so if hanging on to your job is the main goal, um, I don't know. That's maybe this is a pretty hard take here, but um, maybe pastoring isn't the greatest thing for you, the greatest
Mm.
option for you. You gotta ask yourself, why are we pastoring? You
Mm.
know, what
Mhm.
what what is this gospel that we are? Who is this Christ that we are sharing with people? What kind of liberation are we offering to these people that we ourselves have or have not experienced? And if we continually speak in ways that are just trying to make ourselves look good, that's a that's a that's rough, you know. And
Yeah.
I think every pastor needs to ask themselves that hard question.
Yeah.
And you are right. What you said earlier, DJ. I don't think the first step is to tell your elder board, like, oh, I'm a porn addict. I do think that it's better to get some recovery first, um, under your belt, so that you are well on your way to recovery, and then you can have this important conversation with your, elder board, saying, this has been my struggle for the past how many years, and I've been going through recovery now for the past, 9 months or so. and this is the difference that I'm experiencing now than I was back then. And you know, I think that's a better place to have that conversation. But I still think that it's worth it to have that conversation, especially for the sake of the gospel.
Yes.
And when congregation members are coming up to you saying, "Hey, Pastor Bob, I've got this porn issue. What should I do?" Well, now you can tell them from experience what they should do, rather than saying, "Oh man, feel sorry for you, brother. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you can ask Google or something." You know,
Well, pray more and go to Bible study more. I mean,
yeah,
that's
maybe you
the
should pray
Bible
more.
answer.
You know, the Lord will set you free, and just pray for it. So because they don't, the pastors who say that, they don't really know what to do. So, uh,
Hmm.
uh, yeah. So I feel like um, I empathize with pastors, but I experientially know what it's like to be liberated from the shame, because wherever I go, whether it's in the privacy and the confidentiality of my groups, or whether I'm up speaking, I think I bumped into you at the Gospel Coalition at EV Free
Hmm.
Fullerton,
Yes.
and when I spoke there, you know, I spoke about sex addiction. I told them, hey, I'm a former pastor, and the entire time that I was a pastor, I was a porn addict.
Mm.
I mean, you heard a hush over the room, and I never really know what the outcome's going to be, and honestly I don't care, because um I just know that with Christ releasing me from my shame, and Christ being with me in my recovery, and my wife knowing my story, that I'm good. What people think about me in their opinion is, that's their prerogative. But I tell you, DJ, after my talk, um there was a sizable line of
Mm.
people wanting to
Mm.
talk to me
Mhm.
and wanted to thank me for saying what I said, because
Mhm.
either they are going through the same thing, or they've got people that they want to help in their congregation. So I just feel like if a pastor is going to go ahead and get recovery for themselves, they are going to multiply blessings for themselves and for their church. I fully believe it.
Yeah.
But even
Yeah.
if there's persecution involved, you got to face it. Like that's um people are going to do what they do, but that doesn't mean that you'll never pastor ever again. You might need to be in a season of healing first before you pastor again. But again, if we're just trying to cling on to our pastor jobs or reputation, what what really has the gospel saved us from?
Mm. Well, thank you for saying that. And that's a whole nother conversation, understanding how the gospel actually uh, changes us from the inside out. Because it's easy to overlay Asian culture on top of Christianity and see it as moralism and performance and righteousness and duty,
Yeah.
and never really understand the uh, freedom on the experiential level, and the freedom we have to come before Christ and in community with our brokenness. I think that's very hard to see in many Asian churches, if I could
Mm,
say it that way.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. But let's finish out this conversation with what does recovery look like for a pastor that's willing to get help?
Sure.
And how long did it take for you, or how long does it take on average to get to a place where they can make some better decisions for themselves and their family?
Yeah. Recovery comes in stages, and so initially, you're looking at a 90-day sobriety period,
Mm.
90 days straight of abstaining from the very activities that um, that violate your conscience.
Mm.
Um, and the a lot of the scientific research shows what happens when you give your brain that 3-month rest period.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
it's a very moldable, pliable organ the brain is. And
Mm.
so when it has been traumatizing itself repeatedly because of our actions that violate our conscience, um, the brain is dealt violent blows. um, and the executive functionings don't work as well as they used to. But that doesn't mean that it is permanently damaged.
Mm.
Giving it that 3-month break will give it a lot of rest. And then once you get past that 3-month mark, you're able to do some of the deeper work, such as um, maybe going into some childhood traumas that needed to be healed,
Mm.
doing a bit of identity work, such as um, maybe growing up with this need to be desired. Um, and one of the cool Instagram posts recently for Covenant Eyes, which is a software, filtering
Mhm.
software for porn, is said that porn addiction is, or no, sorry, I think fantasizing,
Mhm.
sexual fantasizing is
Okay.
basically a desire to be desired.
Mhm.
And so, where did that come from? We can explore some of this desire to be desired and where that
Mhm.
fell short, and finding other ways to deal with life head on instead of numbing out and fantasizing. How to be a truth teller instead of a liar and a deceiver, which we are so prone to do as porn and sex addicts. So
Mm.
we do a lot of
Mm.
deep work in the course of sex addiction recovery,
Okay.
and a lot of repair work as well in our relationships.
Mhm.
Um, so
Mhm.
it could be um, maybe like a two year therapy journey, and after that, I think the structures that a person builds into their life are the kinds of structures that they will need to maintain for the rest of their life, similar to
Mhm.
someone who is a recovering alcoholic. They're going to
Mm.
need to live with different structures in place, or else um, they're likely to go back into their alcohol habits.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay. Well, thank you for walking us through that so that people have a little bit of light of what that journey would look like. Because I think
Yes,
some of the hesitation is the fear of the unknown, and so
yes,
while they know what it's like to pastor give pastoral counsel to people,
hmm,
they may not have experienced having to go to counseling for themselves for an addiction. That's just really raw and
right,
really painful, but
right,
really healing as you do that hard work.
right. Yeah, there are 30
Yeah.
tasks involved
Wow.
in the sexual addiction recovery model,
Mm, mm,
and all sex addiction therapists are trained in the 30 tasks.
okay.
And it's yeah, research shows that it is the most effective way to get long-term sobriety.
Excellent. So, how can people reach out to you? I know you're here in Orange County, and you provide um, therapy on a number of topics, but certainly sex addiction, and especially for pastors.
Right. Yeah, I do. Sex addiction is my primary focus,
Okay.
and I do run a pastors group on Fridays currently. Um, and yeah, we meet in my office in Diamond Bar, and um, people can reach me by going to my website, which is newlegacycounseling.com. And I just want to say that I'm all for pastors getting as much resources as possible.
Hmm.
Sometimes they may feel hesitant to reach out to a sex addiction therapist. They might want to maybe
Hmm.
learn some more.
Hmm. Hmm.
So, they can listen to my podcast that is devoted to sex addiction.
Hmm.
It's called SA, which stands for sex addiction. SA, Speak Easy.
Hmm.
There are a number of other great podcasts as well. I think Pure Desire is another fantastic Christian podcast devoted to sex addiction. I think for those in the Northern California area, um, Community Presbyterian Church has a counseling center in San Ramon. It's in the East Bay, and they have a sex addiction center there. It is a fantastic resource. So, yeah, anyone who is needing to go get some recovery, because they are Christian, they will really give you that perspective that you're needing. But yeah, I would love to speak with more pastors. I care about the church. I care about pastors feeling like they have had a true encounter with Christ in this area. And yeah, if anyone wants to speak to me, I would love to speak confidentially to them.
Great. Thank you so much, Roy. Thank you for your work, and I'm grateful for you as a brother and how you've experienced the freedom of Christ.
Oh, DJ, yeah, likewise. I'm grateful for the work that you're doing, and it's always an honor. I'd love to have this conversation anytime.
Okay. Thank you, Roy.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.